Spoiler warning for Irving Rapper's 1942 film Now Voyager. I hate the letterbox description for this one because it directly contradicts what I loved about this movie and makes it sound like it's a movie about a woman whose life gets better because of a man. At the beginning of this film, Charlotte Vale, played by Bette Davis, is described as an ugly duckling and unwanted, and the person who describes her that way is her mother, who's one of the most contemptible characters I've ever seen. It's apparent right from the start that her mother is domineering and mentally and emotionally abusive, which is why Charlotte is painfully insecure and shy. Since this is one of my movies that changed my life videos, I want to clarify early on that I have a great relationship with my mother, so that's not why this movie resonates with me. Early in the film, Charlotte's describing herself as fat and ugly, and it's obvious that her mother made her feel that way. We see a flashback to when she was 20 and was with a man who wanted to marry her, and there's a pretty noticeable juxtaposition between how she looks and acts in the flashback compared to now. Her sister-in-law Lisa introduces her to a psychiatrist, Dr. Jackwith, because she's worried Charlotte is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Naturally, her mother doesn't approve. Charlotte barely even says a word until Dr. Jackwith talks to her alone. He's very kind to her and discovers that she carves ivory boxes and praises her skills and asks if he can have one. And the look on Charlotte's face when he compliments her work is indicative of someone who's only ever been criticized. Even though I can't relate to the relationship Charlotte has with her mother, her character still resonates with me because the juxtaposition of how she is in the flashback compared to now reminds me of how I was extremely outgoing as a kid, and then I got bullied in elementary school and became very quiet, introverted, and socially anxious, which always bothered me because teachers would call me shy, and I've never identified as shy. I remember being outgoing and witnessing the shift in my personality, but not being able to stop it or fix it. And the way Charlotte's face lights up when someone praises something she worked on resonates with me because I'm so used to being criticized that it's genuinely a surprise if someone has anything nice to say, which is why I'm terrible at receiving compliments. Charlotte's niece June shows up and starts making fun of her too and says we always rag on her, it's just a game, probably because she grew up witnessing her grandmother do it. Charlotte has a nervous breakdown and Dr. Jackwith recommends she spend time at his sanitarium, Cascade. Once she's there, she basically becomes a brand new woman. After being free from her mother's control, she loses weight, starts dressing nicely, and develops some sort of confidence. Some people might criticize the film if they interpret it as saying she had to lose weight and stop wearing glasses in order to be attractive, but I don't think Bette Davis looks overweight at all in this movie, and normally I'd find it questionable if a movie is implying that a woman of her size needs to lose weight, but I feel like that's part of the point. Her mother makes her feel like she's fat even though she isn't, and if she is overweight or unhealthy, she's only that way when she's living with her mother, so clearly her mother is contributing to that. Her mother criticizes the way she dresses but only approves of sensible clothing. She tells her she needs to wear her glasses even though an oculist says she doesn't need them. One thing that stood out to me immediately about this film was its depiction of mental and emotional abuse. Bear in mind, this movie was released 2 years before Gaslight, and I spent most of my life not even realizing that emotional and mental abuse were a thing. The first time I dated someone who treated me horribly, when I tried to call them out on it, they replied, "So, I've never hit you," which just perpetuated this myth that it's only abuse if it's physical. So I believe Now Voyager was ahead of its time in its depiction of verbal, mental, and emotional abuse, and I've experienced firsthand how those types of situations gradually wear you down until you become a person you no longer recognize. And when you're finally free from that situation, you look back and you can't believe how much one person's words and actions could turn you into someone you never wanted to be. So in my eyes, this was something really groundbreaking to see in a movie from 1942. Instead of going home after Cascade, Charlotte decides to go on a cruise, which was her sister-in-law Lisa's idea. There, she's asked to share a carriage with a married man named Jerry. He asks Charlotte for help picking out presents for his 2 daughters. They start to become friends, and Jerry tells her about his daughter Tina, who he says is convinced she's an ugly duckling, and obviously Charlotte sees a lot of herself in Tina. Jerry notices that Charlotte doesn't seem to have the highest opinion of herself, and I think the conversations they have demonstrate how even after someone breaks free from their abuser, they still carry around the memories of the verbal abuse, which shapes the way they see themselves. So here's this woman who's finally allowed to look and feel like herself, and yet she still has that inner voice replaying the horrible things that people have said about her. This shows how progress isn't linear. She still has to continue working at improving her confidence, and I think that's something most people can relate to. I wish I could stop replaying every negative thing that's ever been said about me relentlessly in my head, but I think humans are predisposed to remembering things that are tied to negative emotions. It feels like every time someone says something mean about me, I'd need to hear at least 10 nice things about me to make up for it. For some reason, the negative comments just hold too much weight. So we're seeing Charlotte say unkind things about her past self because those are things her mother probably told her ad nauseum and now they're ingrained in her mind. But Jerry seems sympathetic towards her, and he writes a letter to his daughter Tina, and it seems like after his conversations with Charlotte, he has a better understanding of why his daughter behaves the way she does. Charlotte meets Jerry's friends, and through them she learns that Jerry's wife is manipulative, doesn't love Tina, and prevented Jerry from pursuing his dream career as an architect. Jerry's love for their daughter is the only thing keeping him from divorcing this woman. That's another thing about Now Voyager that surprised me, the fact that the man also experienced mental and emotional abuse. I feel like even now, 82 going on 83 years after this movie was released, there are still people who inexplicably think men can't be victims of abuse, or at the very least, they don't realize how often men experience abuse. Jerry's friend also mentions that his wife is jealous of Tina and describes her as the child she never wanted, which echoes Charlotte's relationship with her mother. Eventually, Charlotte and Jerry fall in love, but they decide it would be better if they don't see each other again. Charlotte returns home from the cruise, and her family is surprised by how much she's changed. It's obvious she's made a lot of friends and was very popular on this cruise. Most of her family seems to react in a positive way, except of course for her mother, who tries to tear her down and is just as controlling as ever. She tells Charlotte what to wear to a party they're having that night, and she tells her she should wear her glasses so she's less of a shock to others. Charlotte tries to stand up for herself, which obviously isn't easy. A corsage arrives for her in the mail from Jerry, which reminds her that she's worthy of being loved despite what her mother says, and that helps her work up the courage to tell her mother to stop treating her this way. Her mother reacts to that in a completely normal, sane way by intentionally falling down the stairs so she can get pity from her relatives. At the party, Charlotte reconnects with a man named Elliot. They start seeing each other and eventually become engaged. But then at a party, she has a chance encounter with Jerry, who's been working as an architect at a medical center. She asks how Tina is doing, and it turns out Jerry took Tina to see Dr. Jackwith based on Charlotte's recommendation. Seeing Jerry again makes Charlotte realize she doesn't love Elliot enough, so she breaks off the engagement. And it's a pretty amicable breakup where she and Elliot discuss the situation calmly and maturely. I feel like I've seen similar scenarios countless times in movies, but the person usually doesn't break it off in time or waits until the wedding, I guess for dramatic effect. So I think it's admirable to show someone come to that realization and call off the engagement right away. Her mother doesn't react well to the news and says some horrible things. Charlotte tells her mother that she never asked to be born and that her mother never wanted her. During the dispute, her mother has a heart attack and dies. Charlotte blames herself and is overcome with guilt, so she goes back to Cascade. There, she meets Jerry's daughter Tina and tells her she reminds her of herself when she was that age. Charlotte's desire to help Tina makes her forget about her own problems, and she basically becomes a mentor of sorts to her. I never expected the story to go in this direction, but I was pleasantly surprised by it. I love when movies can remind you how good it feels to help others. I haven't made a video in this series yet about my third favorite film of all time, Ikiru, but that's part of what I love about that movie as well. By helping Tina, Charlotte's also helping herself in the process. Tina makes Charlotte feel needed, and as someone who's spent their entire life feeling unwanted, that's a pretty big deal. I love that being invested in Tina's well-being seems to have a bigger impact on Charlotte than her romance with Jerry. Once Tina improves, Charlotte brings her home to Boston. Dr. Jackwith agrees to let Tina stay with Charlotte as long as her relationship with Jerry remains platonic, which they both agree to. Charlotte tells Jerry that she sees Tina as his gift to her, and helping Tina is her way of being close to him. The fact that this movie doesn't end with Jerry and Charlotte together is another thing that surprised me in a good way. I think it's an even deeper form of love that they're willing to sacrifice a romantic relationship with each other to do what's in Tina's best interest. And I always love when a movie has a happy ending but the protagonist is still single, because children grow up watching fairy tales where people fall in love and live happily ever after, and it reinforces this belief that people need to be in a relationship to be happy. So I think it's important for movies to show characters who are capable of being happy on their own. I think we need more of that. The film ends with Jerry asking Charlotte if she's happy, to which she replies, "Don't let's ask for the moon, we have the stars," which I think is a nice reminder to make the most of what you've got instead of wanting more, because wanting something you can't have is a surefire way to end up miserable. People tend to go around with this mentality of, if I get this thing or accomplish this goal, then I'll finally be happy. Then if it happens, they're happy for a little while, and then they have the same mentality about something new. So we're just constantly moving the goalpost for ourselves and only allowing ourselves to feel joy briefly, which is why I feel like instead of fixating on what you wish you had, it's important to reflect on what you currently have and remember how badly you wanted those things before you had them, so you can continue feeling grateful for the way your life is right now. I love this movie so much because seeing the growth that both Charlotte and Tina experience is such a great reminder of how sometimes a person just needs a bit of kindness, empathy, and the freedom to discover themselves. And I feel like the biggest life lesson from this film is the importance of trying to be the the person you needed when you were younger?